Hello, I'm very happy to be welcome you again after many months to a new episode of Affectively. I've been away and Affectively has been away for about a bit over a year. And that's the date from the podcast that you're going to watch or listen to today. I recorded it a year ago. I, of course, didn't have this planned. I thought I would get to it at some point during the past few months. My baby's 9 months old already, which, yeah, crazy to think about. But in any case, I have recorded a few episodes in the meanwhile, and I will start editing them as well. So Affectively is continuing, and it continues as it was born with the intention to explore self-organizing settings and emotions. And for this chat, I have Chris and Alex with me, my two supervisors, and they share a lot of their experience. And especially, I find very interesting, you will see their journey from having done things in a certain way before to how they do it now, that they are more aware and attuned to emotions. And it's very interesting because they have a wealth of knowledge. They have, at the moment, 4 prototypes. I mean, it's relatively, let's say, established organization and communities. Still, I talk about them as prototypes. The peer-to-peer lab itself, energy communities, huge topic, a journal called Ephemera, and a rural makers community, the Tzoumakers. And they share their learnings. And I think it's very interesting. And especially apart from the conversation around these prototypes and how they deal with them, for me, it was a huge learning that, and maybe it was obvious, but I didn't know it, I didn't understand it, that the way we look at things, let's say we have capitalism, it's our macro socioeconomic system at the moment, and we usually do it top down. So we start, this is the system, this is what is taken into account, and this is what is not taken into account, okay, work, for example. And then we take it down. So we have, like, in the middle somewhere, we have labor, or the understanding of labor in our society. Then we have organizations, how we understand them and how they are set up. And in them already, then there is this whole human layer of emotions and the proposal, actually, how they see it. You'll see Alex and Chris, they come from social technologies, but then also so STS, sorry, not social technologies, and Alex from political economy, so very, very relatively high up. But their proposal, or how they see it, is that we start from the bottom. We start from what actually truly matters, and that is people trying to meet their needs. And loads of those needs are emotional because we're social beings. And at the end of the day, that is what's left, the relationships with each other. So this is huge, and I think I had never had a look at it in this way. So for me, this was very insightful, and I hope that you enjoyed. Listen carefully, because they talk in a relatively simple way, but then it's like there's a lot to what is, there's a lot of complexity to what they are saying. I had to listen to this episode like 10 times to be able to understand and get to the essence of it, like this shift from starting by the basic interactions between human beings, because, as they say, everything is inherently collective. At the end, we talk about the ways of commons. And yeah, I just really hope that you enjoy this conversation. I also just wanted to warn you that I've edited a lot because I was sharing a lot of comments, and it was more of a conversation. And I have also received the feedback that it would be good for me to reduce the length of the podcasts a little bit. So this is why, if you hear that it gets cut out on a sentence from me, don't worry, this is just the way I have edited it. And yeah, without further ado, I hope that you enjoy this podcast, and leave me notes on the comments. I will try to make also a better work in linking the papers that we name in the show notes, and you'll hear more from me in the upcoming months. So welcome to a new episode of Affectively. Today is a special one I think, because I'm here with actually my two supervisors of the PhD, Chris and Alex. And this is a conversation there from the Peer-to-Peer Lab. This is a conversation I've been wanting to have for a while. And I think that it's about something that is clear to me in a way, but I'm curious to see if there are more aspects that we discovered together. But it's like, how does my research that has to do with more self-organizing and emotions in a more explicit way fit with the overall research of the Peer-to-Peer Lab and the Cosmolocalism project specifically, which is, let's say, where my PhD is embedded. How to create a sustainable economy through the commons. Okay, what role do emotions and self-organizing play in this whole thing? So that's the big endeavor that we have for this conversation. And before moving any further, I would just like to give you the word so you can briefly introduce yourselves.
Okay, so I'm Chris. You're right that my work revolves around how communities deal with technology. I don't much like the term innovation because it's too broad. So I prefer to say I'm dealing with technology and how that comes to be and how it enables communities and how communities better themselves through the mediation of technologies. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I started researching rural communities. Now I'm migrating towards energy communities or a mix of the both. But that's about it. I'm an STS person, a science and technology kind of guy. Yeah, you go.
Yeah, to me, it's very well put that I have a background of what I would like to be political economy, although it is something I have tried to construct from different disciplines that have informed my education. So I haven't really, I haven't used any formal tag of student of political economy or whatever of political economy. It's in none of my degrees, but it's the thing that kind of makes sense of all the different random stuff I've found myself. I'm obsessed with the concept of value and different ways of understanding it. I dedicated my PhD research on that and trying to continue this discussion, but getting beyond political economy as a field of dealing with the role of the state, taxation, and other boring stuff, but as something that can be more political and connected to a broader array of economic functions and activities and modes of organizing, basically. So that's it gets a bit abstract, so that this is where I connect with the community level to observe more concrete examples of what is it that we're interested about and why do we even discuss about value and other abstract concepts. The important thing is how they materialize in concrete practice.
So the P2P Lab is a research collective, basically. We started by looking into the intersection of open source technology and peer-to-peer practices within communities. But over the years, the focus of the type of work that we do has broadened. Is that the word? Broadened significantly, I guess. So the commons is at the very middle of it right now, but we do research where we try and conceptualize alternative social and production arrangements in society. So we try to go through all of the disciplines that would play a part in this. And what was lacking severely, I would say, up to this point, was this sort of emotional exploration of humans as, as a species, which is probably the most important one out of our characteristics, I suppose. So that's why we're super excited to have your work featured within this umbrella of exploring alternative ways of living, basically, and producing and distributing resources in society and getting people what they need when they need it in a sustainable and socially just way, I guess. Yeah.
And to complement to that is that when we say that this aspect of the more of the less economized, the less quantifiable traits of human characteristics was missing not only in our research, was also kind of missing in us as a collective self-organized entity, because, and if I were to describe the work of the P2P Lab, what is important to me is that we're not just doing research in a way that it is typically imagined, you know, looking at large data sets, using fancy tools and taking results. We're actually trying to embody it and be part of these organizing practices that we advocate for, or that we would like to have more field to research. That is, so to a certain extent, we're co-creating the field within which we're doing our research and within which we sustain ourselves as an entity and as researchers. So it's it can get messy and complicated, but that is the for me, that is what is exciting about it, what makes it meaningful.
Yeah, that's true. That's very exciting. There's a parallel, I think, with Greater Than as well. There's let's say we're developing the work as we're, let's say, researching and practicing with others, but also experimenting with ourselves and what's going on. So yeah, also feel free to bring any examples of that experience in the conversation. It usually makes it more specific. And Chris, you're already touching upon it, that is like this part of emotions of human beings, how they interact. This was missing. And I'm like, yes, I'm sure like that's valuable. And at the same time, I think the challenge I have is that even if this is much more specific, when we talk about emotions, there's something that it makes it very abstract again. So could you, I don't know, maybe through some examples or showcase a little bit, okay, like why was that missing in a global conversation when we're talking about how to deal with energy communities or how to deal with technology in, I don't know, rural makerspace, or whatever example you want to take. Yeah, why is that layer missing? What is it?
Okay. I think it was because, you're asking me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think it was because these communities deal with very heavy issues that are super important. You know, how you provision energy in an affordable way for a community or for a village or a city or whatever, or how you make sure that people in rural areas have the types of tools that they need to make a living. Those are super important things to ponder upon. And I guess going through the various hurdles that show up in the way, legal ones, financial ones, political obstacles, etc., it kind of takes up most of the available energy most people have when engaging in such a collective way. So both in terms of research, but also actually being there and doing the work, it kind of gets super tiring. And whilst the emotional dimension of all this becomes even more prominent because people are tired and frustrated, etc., should be at the forefront of, you know, dealing with this, learning from this, applying it elsewhere, it sort of gets forgotten, I suppose. And in our case, probably has also to do that most of us are either from an engineering background or an economics background, which, you know, emotion isn't the key word over there, unfortunately, in neither of those disciplines. But, you know, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And if I can give you an example, you know, in our own organization where there's a bunch of different things that we're trying to tackle and minimal resources to do so, and just a handful of people trying to do things, all of the tensions that keep bubbling away, it sort of leads to emotional explosions amongst ourselves, even with a certain understanding of, you know, this is the type of work that we do. And since we're not following orders, these things will be emerging. We never actually sat down and explore this and figure out how we can make it be more, you know, emotionally resonant as a process. So from the moment that your work started being featured and, you know, reading some of your, you know, the literature around your interest and how you think about these things, as far as I'm concerned, it really had an effect on how I perceive my interactions, even with my closest colleagues, not even, you know, within the communities that we embed ourselves. So yeah, I don't know. Did I answer any of your
Yes,
any of that?
absolutely.
Good.
Yeah, you did. Thank you so much. Yes, because I mean, even if it sounds obvious, like sometimes I'll also forget, like, okay, like what is that we're talking about? It really, and hearing you speak, I was reminded of I always bring it up, like Bernhard's affective oscillations, like you were mentioning, bodies, it's heavy, there are tensions, and how many of these collectives end up in burnout or in not being able to deal with conflicts anymore. The conflicts have become the biggest part of the whole thing, and then you cannot really do what you started out to do. So how you observe that and try to somehow, well, regulate it, be aware with it without, I guess that's the tricky part, and we're still trying to understand, all of us, like without wanting and being able to control it, because that's not going to happen. But let's say that now we have touched upon, okay, so what can happen in a collective, that we're dealing with emotions, we're more aware of it, what I just said. But it's like, what does it mean at the macro level? Again, if we say, we all start dealing with these practices, we are more aware of things, but like maybe, let's say my goal or wish would be that by working more on this perspective, that these collectives can be more resilient and sustainable. And then through that, they can, get more to the impact that they wanted to have in the first place. But yeah, like what are other dimensions of all of this? What does it mean to redo or relate with each other in a different way for our systems? What possibilities does that open?
Well, if I think I can take it from the abstract and work my way down, is that a lot of my work is kind of it's easy to get out of whack on what is the level, what do you draw the boundaries of what it is, the thing that I'm looking at. And especially when it is so ambiguous terms like value, like work, like labor. And so a lot of our work has to do with reimagining a different way of arranging human societies, right? From a very political point of view, that some decisions need to take prominence over others, some needs need to take prominence over others. So not everything is kind of there is no perfect system that can arrange stuff by engineering or optimized planning or whatever. You need to get into the field and understand what is at stake. So this is a very material thing. And from my perspective, having tried to get an economics education and background back 20 years ago when I was starting my education, trying to make sense of what is wrong with the world that I intuitively felt. And the typical assumptions of economics and political economy had to do with, rational decisions of human beings maximizing their utility. And I was asking, have you met people? I mean, this never happens. People are very emotional beings. They build relations. They take all sorts of stupid and irrational decisions. And usually the outcomes are more accidental than planned. And then, so on the macro level, as Chris mentioned, we're missing a huge part of human sense-making and organizational principles by not understanding how we can work with affect, with emotions, with relations, with human bodies. And on the second level, in organizing of any sort, for instance, if I were to make an honest planning, as project management terms of my PhD, it would be like, first 2 months excitement, then 8 months of depression, and I would actually plan those processes into the timeline, because it is a part of the process. You're getting out in the jungle of available knowledge. You have no way to navigate other than, of course, the help of any supervisors, colleagues, and so on. But this is entirely and it has to be your endeavor, and it gets frustrating. And then you take decisions that are not necessarily informed by all the possible options. You just follow your gut at some point. And we often speak about intuition and the gut feeling and this way of working with our lives. And I feel this has been a very important factor in my life and everyone else's life. So from my point of view, getting into this field that it feels completely outside of my comfort zone for any background that I have, it feels very, very meaningful to actually help us understand how did we get here and how can we become better in what we do.
Yeah. And if I may add, thinking about it on a macro level, I just tend to go straight to disciplines and how different types of planning operate in society at the larger level and the macro level, as you said. And then rarely, if ever, these aspects of the human condition are considered in any type of planning, even if it's an urban type of planning, economic planning, whatever you may have. If there's any aspect where, you know, people being irrational and sentimental and very emotional, you know, some sort of behavioral science with some kind of psychology may be considered, but then it also tends to be super sterilized and not very helpful in the end. And that fuzziness that you talked about in your introduction, you know, how it doesn't get super concrete when we're talking about human emotions and theorizing about them. But then that's what we need to capture somehow, or account for, if not capture, because capturing it sounds a bit difficult to achieve. You know, it's something that cannot be captured. But then considering it, when you plan any kind of large-scale activity for our species, would be extremely helpful to have. And then I don't know if I would even start from the macro scale, actually. I'd start the other way around and build up. Consider this aspect of humans in, you know, a family, a little collective, a bigger organization, a network of organizations, and carry up, I guess. And that would be.
And not only as an aspect that is quite marginal, is right at the core. I mean, this is a different perspective. So it's not a mechanism through which economic outcomes might occur. It is the meaning-making machine to begin with.
Yeah.
So this is how people make sense of their coexistence. It's not through numbers and data.
Sadly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For some people, yeah.
I don't know, like share any current examples that you have where you think, even if you're, you know, not working with this explicitly, but where you say, you know, if we applied this lens of emotions and self-organizing, or first of all, think about, you're working with communities, is self-organizing a given, or how do you see that? And then, yeah, the role and lens of emotions in those, like, what is a little thing that could be different if you applied it more, for example, something like this. Can go though any direction that you think makes sense for you.
I have an example. It's because recently I've been embedding myself more and more into the energy community, both literature and also experience, because I am currently the president of an energy co-op. And a mistake that we did planning this this community was, and you know, it was a stupid mistake, I must admit, that we assumed that this self-organizing element, by just creating the energy community and having members, it would be a given. And it absolutely isn't. And also the types of interactions that community members would have would be sort of rational, you know, based on the practicalities of what energy production, distribution, and consumption entails. And that is absolutely not the case. And contrasting our own experience, so basically this initiative was something that I drove forward as someone with an economics background and an engineer. So to our defense, we didn't really have this heightened understanding, I suppose, of trying to elevate, you know, human interaction and bringing people to the fore and making it about them so they could own the co-op or the community, and then all of us moving forward together, and contrasting this with another energy community in Athens, where it was built by people with such sensibilities, I can see a huge gap between how they act as a community and how they cope with, you know, the plethora of difficulties that keep popping up. You know, there's money issues involved, you know, legislation, people from big utility companies that make our lives horrendous as we try and do something useful for society. So in that other community, I see that there's a big sense of, you know, us moving forward together. There's cohesion to how people try and address those difficulties that keep popping up. And there's mechanisms that deal with, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Not dissent, internal dissent, but, you know, negative emotions, people feeling frustrated and taking it out on the others. Whereas in our case, that really isn't, it's not there. So now we are trying and build this capacity by just constantly engaging with members, asking them about how they're coping with the difficulties that we're facing, what their needs are, how we can help them out with this, how we can involve them more in the process. And gradually there is this internal discussion taking place about people utilizing their emotions as a vehicle to communicate their frustrations. And I think that is extremely beneficial, you know? So say, oh, I can't cope with this anymore. It's been a year. We haven't seen any benefit. It's only costing us money. And how am I supposed to take good care of my family through this, you know? And I personally try and go back to discussing how they feel, because that's the only thing that I can affect at this point in time, you know? I can't push the Ministry of Energy to do their job more effectively. What I can do is say, I understand. All of us are dealing with the same issues. And this is how I try and cope with this. And, you know, look at Christina, how she's coping with this. I just translated my name into the female right now because I couldn't think of something else. But yeah, so I'm maybe going off track right now, but by even recognizing the need to engage people emotionally in the community, I already see some sort of benefit in how people see this as a collective effort rather than something that originally, it's something that I and my partner in this initiated. So people had this, oh, it's a service. Why aren't you doing your job better?
Yeah.
Now I kept trying to remind them, it's not my job. I'm doing this for free. It's just a thing that all of us are trying to do because it's a good thing. It's a way to explore energy sustainability in society for us, for your kids. I don't have any kids, but I care for other people's kids. So please don't treat me as your disgruntled employee, but as an equal in this endeavor. So with this shift, I do see there's better tools, I guess, if I'm going to be utilitarian about it, as to engaging people in a self-organizing way. And I think it should be the very core of it.
Yeah.
You know, you can have all kinds of, you can have a mandate about what people are expected to do in a collective, and rules and specific resources to engage. But if you don't go through the motions emotionally, then not much effort is successful, I think. So yeah, I don't know. Is that a good example?
Yeah,
I think it is.
super interesting, actually, because I think you've touched upon, well, let's say on the other leg, we have the leg of emotions, but then also like the assumption that, we're talking about self-organizing, but then it's not that you say, oh, let's get self-organized, and then it just happens. It's like something that, at least for me, the core is working with power in a different way. So that touches upon all sorts of how we understand interactions, how we understand power, how we understand ourselves, like what we're allowed to do, when we're not allowed to do, what we're supposed to do, like what are the expectations. So it just basically changes everything, and we cannot have the assumption that people know how to do that. I think that us trying in the prototypes like that, we already fail often enough in understanding what the implications are of not having a power over just dealing with the mandate or expectation, but more, let's do this together. What does this mean? And what are all the frustrations that come within, and frictions, and also beautiful parts of it, right?
The point really about that is about bringing those worlds closer together and synthesizing what they bring. Two worlds, I mean, you know, the economics, engineering type of seeing of the world in compartmentalized little boxes that can be planned and predicted and calculated and so on, which of course this is not what all is about, it's just a caricature version. And then the emotional complexity, working with communities, the more things that are usually considered fluffy around business and organizing. But for me, when you were describing the previous question about with the concrete examples, I like one of the ways you framed the prototypes as using the word narrative. And I've been coming back again and again on this, trying to, because it convinces me the most that this is an active process of narrative creation. We're co-writing a specific story with these communities, and the emotional dimension is basically a different starting point, so that we're beginning, it's not that we're dismissing all the work of planning or with setting deadlines and being responsive and responsible and accountable to specific things that we have committed, but it's just that we take a different starting point and try to engage people into building more ownership into what we do, which is the difference that you described before. Because I find a lot of the things that have historically been practices of the radical left or revolutionary movements and so on fall into the trap of reproducing the world they want to change by building heroes and outsourcing hopes and ideas into that. I really like one of our favorite comedians, Dylan Moran. He has this skit when he speaks about when Obama was elected, and he was making this grand promises that, okay, let's work together, collaborate, and build a different future. And he said, we were all just standing there like teenagers saying, no, you do it. Because it's, and this is, I think, emotional immaturity best described, that we're constantly looking for heroes to burden them with our hopes and fears about the future, and then we stand, okay, if it doesn't happen, then it's your fault. And it's easy to blame some person than a system or a structure or the cumulative effect of a number of micro decisions that you didn't take part of. So it's much more complicated. So building a different narrative is actually enmeshing into this complicated reality and becoming more aware that we're here, we're working with this complexity, and we can actually do something about it. So on the flip side.
Yeah, so I did a workshop in December with a group of political activists in Marseille, in France, and we spent quite a bit of time landing together, getting to know each other, working with the emotional dimension of things, and like sharing our stories, like why were they doing this work and what did they mean in relationship to their lives. And there was a very interesting debate that happened there of people saying, like, you know, why are we talking about this? You know, like, let's just go and deal with what, or kind of like destroy the far right. And they have all of these amazing programs. Well, amazing is definitely a poor choice of words. Let's say efficient or effective that actually work. And we have to, be just as specific as they are and be, just try to have as much impact as we can because they're being very effective. And we need to find ways to do the same thing. And then she was saying, because we're just talking about fluffy stuff right now. So what is it that we're doing? And then another person said, well, actually, this is not the traditional left. So the traditional left would probably have this approach of just going into the action, but now we're trying to do things from a different perspective, which is to really engage the emotional part, like why are we doing this, dealing with each other, trying to exactly build up those relationships so that we can all do things in the future together, understand why we're doing this, building this common identity. Probably, I think, in a way, working on the narrative, like why are we doing this? Why are we doing this together? Because I think this happens very often. You get into a workshop and they're like, yes, let's do this initiative together. But there's a lot of work and a lot of emotional work in understanding why we're building this narrative, what is a narrative, like what are the different parts coming together to it, so that we can address the challenges of our time from a different place than we've been doing it till now, which is very based on just like what are the strategies, what are the things that we're doing, and including that emotional layer. So that's something I don't know much about, but I see it like more and more coming up. And as you were saying before, without wanting to make it utilitarian, but yeah, like a tool to be able to build things from a different way and perspective. Yeah, so I don't know if you have experiences around that, but it's a thought that I find very interesting, that instead of rushing into things and thinking, let's just build up those strategies, that, well, let's start with the relationships. So what's there of that?
I have a thought on this, I guess. So it's in two layers, I suppose. So I very much enjoyed the example you gave, and thinking about it from my own experience, indeed, how you actually be more successful in communicating some, broad leftist ideals and making them happen in society. It is more difficult than trying to communicate right-wing ones, for obvious reasons, because it relies on the collective element and the good parts of humans, which is the more difficult thing. But anyways,
and things less likely the big oligarchic media are willing to support and give a push. So it's.
But even before that, making such an a group, an initiative, an endeavor be cohesive internally, this thing needs to work for the members of this initiative before they start communicated outwardly. And an example that I have from another collective that I'm part of, which is Ephemera, which is an open access journal that's been around for more than 20 years now. And the collective has always been big, but always in flux. Who comes in, who comes out, etc. And it's always interesting to notice, because we have one yearly meeting each year, and when new members show up to this meeting, something just clicks there. Even though what Ephemera is and what it does is very well documented, it's been around for many years, and the tasks that we take up are fairly simple too. We try and put out a good journal that communicates good work, do some events that are inclusive and nice and well put together. But actually being a member of the collective is all about those connections that people form amongst themselves, and building some solidarity and emotional resonance is the most important aspect, I think. All of the building of the community for the collective takes place in preparing a workshop together and taking care of logistics and having a drink, and then do some sessions and have some food and share stories and bond a little bit. And that's when people say, oh, you know what? I love Ephemera. And it's for older members, it's where they decide to not live the collective just yet. I've been in this place a couple of times now where I'm feeling frustrated and say, you know what? Fuck this. Can I use this expression in your podcast? I'm done. I'm out. No more. This is taking up too much of my time. It's a lot of stress for nothing. And then I go to a meeting and I meet people and I catch up with them, what's been happening in their lives, and share my own frustrations, etc. And then that's why I'm still here, because I love these people. So you need this. You need to have good internal cohesion for then to have good strategies in pursuing social goals. And without it,
Here's when we can also bring in we said before, core element in our work is the commons, and we haven't referred to it explicitly, but here's where we can use it to understand the ontological difference of working with and through the commons. That is, as you mentioned, that when people, newcomers coming into this collective, there is this atmosphere or this vibe that stems from people's experiences that is somehow manifested physically in the space. And this is what we describe in very abstract terms, the affective commons, right? Or the affective commoning, because it's a dynamic. And as you said, the vibe or the atmosphere of a specific space. And this is something material. It is not something that that we just imagine in the ideal space of ideas or pure cognitive knowledge or whatever. It is a bodily function, and it interacts with specific stimuli of people, of how you can see them staring at each other, adjusting the tone of the voice in how they work together, and it has physical manifestations. So it is a very material thing. And to go back to the discussion about radical politics in general and walking the talk of social change and so on, I think this is the part that has been missing in the in which the far right has been doing very well, because of course they have a much easier task. They are one specific set of emotions they're targeting. It is fear and anxiety. And we know perfectly well how easy it is to make people fearful and anxious. And when you're trying to build something different and you need to embrace the emotional wealth and relational wealth of people, it is much more difficult. And you need to create different instruments and different practices to work with that. And I think this is the difficult part. But at the end of the day, everything ends up being, so I don't want to dismiss completely the material field, because I think all of that is material. It has to do with the reproduction of human lives and livelihoods, in a specific space and time. So it is not just about building a utopia after an assumed situation where all the existing structures magically disappear, or we just smash them. It is about working through and with these structures to create something new.
I think that this layer of affective commons is a bit, I mean, maybe not rewriting, but let's say that in any other type of the commons, and that's maybe what I would be a bit curious, because the Peer-to-Peer Lab is actually, it was one of the main institutions that gave vocabulary to, let's say, the second wave of commons, so the digital commons, that usually it's more, it's guys on a computer like doing things from different parts of the world and contributing to building Wikipedia or anything together. And it's like, but they also have this emotional layer in a different way. And I guess that in the first wave of commons, then one with natural resources that Ostrom built the 8 principles around, there was also, or there had to be, or there might be, or it might have been even better if we introduced this layer of commoning, communities caring about those resources. So I was wondering if you wanted to add anything about the digital commons and how you see those communities, and how could, let's say, this layer of emotions there enhance support or anything like that.
Well, it's interesting that, for instance, we have been invested ourselves to a lot of our years in studying digital commons communities, and projects like Wikipedia or open source software, or then the more open hardware stuff that also had more material manifestations. But interestingly enough, for instance, one of the latest papers by Bernard, who was in one of the earlier podcasts too, is exactly what we were discussing before, working and building community relations and working with emotions through events, and especially applied to open source software communities, which, the caricature version of which is that usually people not entirely emotionally literate. Of course, this is a bit dismissive, but a large part of the research around that was also quite emotionally literate. So looking at the structures, looking at the patterns of communication, and we say, okay, it works in this particular situation. Why wouldn't it work in any other particular situation? And then we were starting to dig in and finding all of the different stuff. My personal interpretation, I don't know if there's literature or validity into thinking about that. I feel that these waves of the 3 waves of commoning we usually of commons research that we usually refer to, were creatures of their own time and struggles. So, for instance, when Ostrom was documenting the practices of the traditional commons, the fight at the time was, you know, the Homo economicus and the tragedy of the commons just taken for granted. And that was this one fictional story that Garrett Hardin just wrote. It didn't have any empirical implications or evidence, and everyone just took it on face value, and then it was a given. You know, if you put people together, everyone would just die. And Ostrom just used this language to invert the whole narrative and say, look at all of those things that still exist, and they're doing much better than anything else that we have built in hierarchies or markets or whatever. And then the second wave of the digital commons and the knowledge commons, to my understanding, it came with the emergence of a wild west that was the World Wide Web at the time. It didn't have any clear structural aspects, and it just so happened that self-organizing principles got to be embedded in the initial practices. So the first online communities started to work into this way. It organically felt it was more efficient or more interesting. And of course, all of that is now gone because we have a fully hierarchical, big tech dominated internet interaction that is basically feeding on human misery. But those traits of self-organization still remain and are still valid, in my opinion. And this is where we now turn into the third wave, which is not, as you said, looking at a different category of commoning, but kind of integrating the wealth of human relationality. Because I mentioned before, the commons as an ontological difference. Is it a different way of making sense of reality, of things being created in common by things that people agree together and they become embodied into their practice. And I feel these are kind of three abstract categories that we can work with to make sense of the different phenomena that we observe. And of course, any categorization is to a certain extent abstract, so it's not really different. As you said, a lot of these elements coexist, but we have a bigger toolkit now, to put it this way.
I think it's always been there. That emotional element has always been the binding element. And you can see this in the more nuanced works that took place after those, landmark kind of literature that came up. And as Alex was saying, it was not a priority to capture and document it, basically. To document this emotional element, it wasn't the top priority, and so it never took place. But I think that it has always been a prominent feature of explaining why people do stay in these kind of organizing structures and why they put in a lot of effort without an immediate return on investment. And it turns out, when you look at those, meta type of research, that, well, it usually is because they get an emotional satisfaction out of participating in these endeavors. So I guess moving forward to the digital commons, I think that either we need to figure out ways for that physical presence to be an ever-present thing that helps people be grounded emotionally in these endeavors, or figure out the ways to make them a feature of the digital realm, which I don't know how that would take place, but why not? I don't know, I myself find myself feeling emotionally invested in whatever digital communities I engage with. And so it is there. So I suppose documenting it in a better way might be what is needed, or, helping elevate it.
I think the idea of cosmolocalism is very, I think, useful for the current times and challenges that we have.
So when we were first documenting these cosmolocalism as a phenomenon that we could observe, so we found a term that could describe a thing that we felt was happening, right, or observed it was happening. And one way rooted back to the digital commons practices was that what came about with peer-to-peer technologies is that you had this small group dynamics where people just gathered around, self-organized, without anyone telling anyone else what to do, with no predefined roles and so on. And we could see the emergence of these practices potentially scaling worldwide. And there is a level at which that this is happening, and projects like Wikipedia or open source software testify to this. But I think, reflecting back on this shift, in this massive shift in human socialization and co-production that took place with information communication technologies and so on, I think that the Cosmo part of cosmolocalism came to reify the local perspective as the primary force of meaning making for human lives and livelihoods. And to put it in more human understandable terms, is that it feels natural to us to create attachments to things that we can create closer embodied relations, that people we see every day, where we get our cheese and bread from, the local shops and so on, even where our typically or formally our livelihood is reproduced on the global level. Like, we have this payroll that's we provide services to clients to the one place of the earth, we're taxed in another place of the earth, and we actually live in another way, which is kind of the digital nomad reality. But we do create those attachments in a place. And this is not only on an emotional sphere, it is also a recognition of all of this hidden work that isn't taken into account, because I may get my salary from an Estonian institution right now, the Tallinn University of Technology, but whenever I spend my time in Greece, where my family is based, it is the local structures that reproduce whatever I need or my family needs for survival. It is the local roads on which I am driving my 2.5-year-old daughter, and it is those structures and the relationships around that to which my accountability to the survival of my kid are accountable to. So this is a very embodied manifestation that we cannot simply ignore, and it hurts to feel detached from this reality, that you cannot contribute back, to give back to the community and relational level upon which our lives gets reproduced. And if you scale that globally, then this is where it reifies the localized perspective, which is not always geographically local, because it's also communities around themes. Time and space are to a certain extent transcended, but it is by looking at how other people are making sense of their lives and create fuller lives and more meaningful lives that we can say, aha, we can do that too. And we can use those tools to feel better about ourselves, to create a better life in the good life, in the broader sense, not calculated in utilitarian terms alone,
And that, let's say, the commons, it's also these tool or new pair of glasses of looking at things, and where emotions play a very central role. So it's, let's say, we have capitalism as a sort of like, this is for millions of reasons, the sort of framing through which our societies are looking at labor relationships, even labor as a concept. So we have created it and we relate because of it and through it, and relationships of any types. I mean, also in the household in a way. And that this framework, let's say, has some very big holes in it, or is using some of those holes to extract value. So it's a bit what we're talking about. And then the commons gives us, let's say, a new pair of lenses to look at that reality and say, well, you can explain life through capitalism, but you can also, with its many limitations and lots of implications, but you can explain it through different lenses. And that's why, let's say, that the examples we have been talking about are examples that are based on this new lens of wanting to look at the world and put the accent not that much on the value exchange and extraction, but more like the relational value and how we build this better life together. Would this be a more or less way to explain to someone, okay, like that, this is why we're looking the world through the commons in a way? So it's like we're creating, or we're trying with all of these prototypes, with all of the efforts, trying to create a new reality that hopefully in whatever moment in history, it might overcome the other one or create a new one. Maybe it might not be commons in the future, but who knows? So yeah, just asking for validation.
Absolutely, yes. So as far as I see it, you put it very nicely. So the commons sort of puts the many at the center, not the individual. It says it's something for all of us to coexist, you know, and not be sort of antagonistic about how we experience life, but collaborative. And then that emotional layer comes to answer the question of why, you know? When I think about myself, it feels nice, you know? I just fulfill my own needs, and then I don't care about the other people's needs. So why would I want to go to that thing where I need to care about what other people feel like? So one answer is because that's what's sustainable, and caring for yourself isn't. But then that's a negative kind of excuse to justify this shift. The positive one is that it feels nice, you know, when we do stuff together and, you know, get validation from each other, love, positive emotions and all that, that's what feels nice, you know? So instead of trying to put that aspect to the side and say, focus on, oh, you know, because sustainability, and then justice, and what else is a good thing?
I don't know.
What buzzwords? Progress, yes. Progress for all, and not just for a few people. But then you can also say because it feels good, you know?
Yeah.
And then building this trajectory of why it feels good and how we can keep on making it feel good, and, you know, antagonize the feeling good because I have a lot of shit. I have a lot of friends that love me and respect me and consider me a valuable part of their, you know, precious people around. Then that's how you provide very good alternatives to the other thing that you described, capitalism, which, you know, for some people it works very well, but the key word is for some.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, I think that stripping everything away, that's what's left.
Yeah.
And it is why. It answers very well the question why.
Yeah, and I think with this in mind, I feel one of the powerful functions of getting this pair of glasses and trying it on, I think the most influential effect is that this is this cold shower that it just cuts through all the crap and washes the bullshit away, and say, this individualist perspective that, as you very well said, is working for some, it is not by accident. So the commons is not just saying that, you know, we should do things better, let's be more collective, is that things are inherently collective. You cannot survive on your own. This legend of the self-made individual entrepreneur or whatever it might be, it's just bullshit. If you cut through the stories of everyone's lives, you can find millions of different connections and layers of co-produced stuff upon which their whole livelihood has been based. I mean, nobody is really self-made. This is just an artificial category that we created to justify specific power relations. That's it. And if you look at it through the commons, it doesn't change reality how it is. It just changes your perspective on acknowledging the different things upon which your life depends. And then it may make us actually better persons, because if you understand that, society is working collectively, we have this infrastructure and institutions, and then you may take a look into your own household and say, how do my clothes and plates get clean every day when I don't do anything about those things? So it is as you said, it is creating the sorts of mechanisms in our bodies, you know, the dopamine shots or whatever it might be. And it uses it towards creating a situation that can be better off, that puts everyone better off. So that if I am to get some sort of satisfaction by feeling acknowledged and loved, which, let's face it, everyone is looking around that, how about doing that with the people from which your life actually depends? So the people around you, the people that contribute to the stuff you consume or devour for whatever reason, and then, you know, just feel nice for something good instead of something crooked and catastrophic.
It
got a bit existential, but you know.
Yeah, I think it's a very good place of living it. Thank you for bringing those perspectives in and weaving the macro with the micro. I've enjoyed it very, very much. And there's, I think, a lot of future conversations that we can still have in many of the hints that you left through the conversation. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Good luck making sense of all that in your conclusion of the video.
Yeah.
And
I'll do my best.
Always.
Thank you. Thanks. So this was our conversation. I'm proud to call Alex and Chris my supervisors. As I said at the beginning, very insightful conversation for me. I still need to really understand what it means to start from micro and build it our way up, and what implications does it have? As they said in the conversation, it's difficult to have a system that takes care of all of these very different needs and adapts so much to context. So, well, what are the limitations there? And what is it that we need to think about from a research and academic perspective to take these micro, our interactions, the affect, emotions, and build our way up? More Affectively episodes soon. See you.